The morning sun hadn't even risen yet when Robert pushed his cleaning cart through the glass doors of SkyTech Aviation headquarters. His hands, rough from years of hard work, gripped the cart handle as he made his way down the empty hallway. At 62 years old, Robert had become part of the furniture in this building. People walked past him every single day without a second glance. To them, he was just the maintenance guy who emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors. Robert didn't mind being invisible most days. He'd learned a long time ago that people rarely looked beyond the uniform someone wore. He'd been working at SkyTech for 3 years now, arriving at 5 in the morning and leaving long after the sun went down. While everyone else was sleeping comfortably in their beds, Robert was already wiping down conference tables and vacuuming carpets in the executive wing. The building was always quieter in these early hours. Robert liked it that way. No rushing executives bumping into his cart. No impatient managers asking him to come back later. Just the soft hum of the heating system and the squeak of his cartwheels against the polished floor. He took pride in his work even if nobody noticed. Every surface he cleaned, every trash can he emptied, every window he wiped down was done with care. His mama had raised him to believe that any job worth doing was worth doing right. Things had changed at SkyTech about 6 months ago. The old CEO, Mr. Patterson, had retired. Robert remembered him as a decent man who at least nodded good morning when they crossed paths. The new CEO was a different story altogether. Victoria Chen had taken over with a storm of changes and new policies. She was young, sharp as a knife, and had a reputation for turning struggling companies around. But she was also cold in a way that made the entire building feel 10 degrees chillier. Robert had only spoken to her once, and that was by accident. He'd been restocking paper towels in the executive bathroom when she walked in, talking loudly on her phone about budget cuts. She'd looked at him like he was a stain on the wall, waved her hand dismissively for him to leave, and continued her conversation without missing a beat. Robert had quietly gathered his supplies and left. That was how things worked in this world. People like him were meant to be invisible, but Robert noticed things that other people missed. When you cleaned the same offices every day, you heard conversations. You saw documents left on desks. You understood more about the company than most people realized. Robert knew that SkyTech was struggling. He'd overheard enough worried discussions between executives to piece together the story. The company built flight simulators for training pilots, but their newest model was sitting unused in the hangar bay like an expensive paperweight. Something was wrong with it, and nobody could figure out what. On this particular Tuesday morning, Robert was cleaning the main conference room on the executive floor. It was a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a table that could seat 20 people. He was wiping down the table when he heard voices approaching. Quickly, he moved to the corner of the room, trying to make himself small and invisible like he always did. The door burst open and Victoria Chen strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Behind her was the CFO, a nervous-looking man named David who always seemed one wrong word away from a heart attack. Victoria was angry. Robert could tell by the way she moved, quick and sharp like a cat ready to pounce. She threw a folder onto the conference table and started pacing. David stood by the door, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Robert kept his head down and continued wiping the far end of the table, hoping they'd forget he was there. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Victoria said, her voice tight with frustration. "We've spent $18 million on that simulator, and it's been sitting in the bay for 4 months. 4 months, David. Do you know what our investors are saying?" David mumbled something Robert couldn't quite hear. Victoria wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through emails, reading them out loud. Complaints from clients, questions from the board of directors, concerns about the company's future. Each email made her voice sharper, more cutting. "We've brought in 3 different consultants," she continued, "and not one of them can figure out why the hydraulic response system keeps failing. The controls are too sensitive. Every pilot who tries to use it says it feels wrong, like flying through mud. We have a $20 million contract with Pacific Airlines hanging in the balance, and we can't even demonstrate our own product." Robert's hand paused mid-wipe. Hydraulic response system. He knew exactly what she was talking about. He'd walked past that simulator dozens of times, had even looked at it closely during his night shifts when nobody was around. From what he could see, the problem wasn't the hydraulics at all. It was the calibration between the digital controls and the physical feedback system. They were running on different timing cycles, creating a lag that would make any experienced pilot feel like something was off. He shouldn't say anything. He knew that. People like him didn't offer opinions to people like Victoria Chen. But Robert had spent 28 years in the Air Force working with aircraft systems. He'd flown planes that made this simulator look like a child's toy. He'd trained hundreds of pilots and had solved more technical problems than he could count. The answer to their problem was actually pretty simple if they just looked at it from the right angle. Before he could stop himself, Robert cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly. "I couldn't help but overhear. Have you tried checking the timing calibration between the control input system and the hydraulic feedback loop? Sometimes when those run on different clock speeds, it creates exactly the kind of lag you're describing." The room went completely silent. Victoria and David both turned to stare at him like he'd just spoken in an alien language. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Victoria's expression shifted from surprise to something much colder. Her lips curved into a smile that had no warmth in it whatsoever. "I'm sorry, what?" she said, walking toward him slowly. "Did you just try to tell me how to fix our simulator?" Robert felt his stomach drop. He'd made a mistake. A big one. "I just thought maybe you're just maintenance," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with contempt. "You push a mop around and empty trash cans. What would you possibly know about aviation technology? About hydraulic systems? About anything that happens in this company, beyond which cleaning solution to use on glass?" David let out a nervous laugh. Victoria joined in, shaking her head like she'd just heard the funniest joke of her life. Robert felt heat creeping up his neck, but he kept his face neutral. He'd been dismissed and underestimated plenty of times in his life. This wasn't new. It still stung, though, especially when he knew he was right. "I apologize for interrupting," Robert said quietly. He grabbed his cleaning cart and started pushing it toward the door. His hands were steady even though his heart was pounding. "Wait," Victoria called after him, still smiling. "What's your name?" "Robert, ma'am." "Well, Robert, let me give you some advice. Stay in your lane. We have highly trained engineers and consultants working on these problems. People with degrees from MIT and Stanford. People who actually understand aviation. We don't need input from the cleaning staff, understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Understood." Robert pushed his cart out of the conference room and into the hallway. Behind him, he could hear Victoria and David laughing again, their voices carrying through the open door. He kept walking, his jaw tight, his eyes focused straight ahead. He'd learned a long time ago that there was no point in arguing with people who'd already decided what you were worth based on the clothes you wore or the job you did. But as he made his way to the supply closet on the ground floor, Robert couldn't shake the frustration gnawing at his chest. That simulator problem had a solution. A simple one, and it was going to keep sitting there unused while Victoria Chen paid consultants thousands of dollars to overthink something that could be fixed in an afternoon. He stored his cart and sat down on an old chair in the supply closet, letting out a long breath. Through the small window, he could see employees starting to arrive for the day. Young engineers with their coffee cups and laptops, managers in expensive suits checking their phones, all of them walking past him without a glance, just like always. Robert was invisible again, and maybe, he thought, that was exactly how things were meant to be. 2 weeks passed, and Robert tried his best to forget about the conference room incident. He went back to his routine, showing up before dawn and leaving after dark, cleaning the same offices and hallways he'd cleaned 1,000 times before. But he couldn't stop noticing the tension building in the office. Something big was happening at SkyTech, and from what he could piece together, it wasn't good. The executives were having more meetings than usual. Robert would come in at 5 in the morning and find coffee cups still sitting in the conference rooms from late-night sessions. Papers were scattered across desks, and more than once he'd found Victoria Chen's office light on when he arrived, meaning she'd probably slept there. The worry in the building was like a thick fog that everyone could feel, but nobody wanted to talk about. Robert learned what was happening the way he learned most things, by keeping his ears open while staying invisible. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and he was emptying trash cans on the executive floor when he heard Victoria shouting in her office. The door was closed, but her voice carried through anyway. She was on a conference call and she was not happy. "You're telling me you're pulling the entire contract?" $20 million, just gone. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Give me 1 week, just 1 week to demonstrate the simulator and prove it works. There was a pause. Robert kept emptying trash cans, moving slowly so he could hear more. 72 hours. That's not a week. Victoria's voice had gone from angry to desperate. Fine. Yes. We'll be ready. Thank you for the opportunity. Robert heard something slam, probably her phone hitting the desk. Then he heard crying. Quiet, frustrated crying that Victoria Chen probably thought nobody could hear. Robert quickly finished his work and moved down the hallway. Some things weren't meant to be witnessed even by invisible people. The next morning, Robert arrived to find the parking lot already half full at 5:30 in the morning. Something major was definitely happening. When he got inside, the energy was completely different from the usual calm of early mornings. People were rushing around, voices were raised, and there was a feeling of panic that reminded Robert of emergency situations he'd dealt with back in his military days. He was mopping the hallway outside the main conference room when the doors flew open and a crowd of executives poured out. Victoria was in the lead, her face pale and her jaw clenched. Behind her were at least a dozen people from the senior leadership team, all of them looking like they'd just survived a plane crash. Robert pressed himself against the wall with his mop bucket as they passed. He caught fragments of conversation, something about Pacific Airlines threatening to cancel their contract, something about a demonstration that had to happen in less than 3 days, something about their lead pilot instructor quitting last night after a fight with Victoria. This is a disaster, Robert heard David, the CFO, say to someone. Even if we could fix the simulator, we don't have anyone qualified to operate it for the demonstration. Mitchell was our best instructor and he's gone. The backup instructor is in the hospital with pneumonia. We're completely out of options. The executives scattered to different parts of the building, leaving behind the smell of coffee and stress. Robert continued mopping, his mind working through what he'd heard. So they needed someone to operate the simulator in 3 days or the company would lose a massive contract. And they didn't have anyone qualified to do it. Robert knew he should stay out of it. Victoria had made it very clear what she thought of him offering help. But he also knew what was at stake. SkyTech employed over 300 people. If the company lost this contract, there would be layoffs. Probably a lot of them. Robert had seen it happen before at other companies. When the big contracts disappeared, the little people were the first to go. Later that afternoon, Robert was cleaning the break room when he overheard a conversation between 2 junior employees. A young woman named Lisa, who worked in accounting, was talking to someone from human resources. My sister just had a baby, Lisa was saying, her voice shaky. If they start laying people off, I'll be one of the first to go. I've only been here 8 months. What am I going to do? The HR employee tried to reassure her, but Robert could hear the uncertainty in his voice too. Everyone knew the company was in trouble. The rumors had spread faster than wildfire. If this demonstration didn't happen, if they couldn't prove the simulator worked, Pacific Airlines would walk away. And if Pacific Airlines walked away, other clients would follow. Companies had a way of sensing weakness, like sharks sensing blood in water. Robert finished cleaning the break room and made his way down to the basement level where the simulator bay was located. He wasn't supposed to be down there, not really, but nobody ever checked where the maintenance staff went. The bay was a massive open space that used to be a manufacturing floor. Now it housed the new simulator, a piece of technology that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The simulator sat in the middle of the bay, surrounded by computer equipment and diagnostic tools. Robert walked around it slowly, taking in every detail. He'd seen simulators before, lots of them, but this one was impressive. The problem was obvious, though, even from the outside. He could see where the control systems connected to the hydraulic feedback mechanisms, and just by looking at the configuration, he knew his original guess had been right. The timing calibration was off. Can I help you with something? A voice made Robert jump. He turned to find a young engineer standing in the doorway looking at him suspiciously. Just cleaning, Robert said, gesturing vaguely with his hand. making sure everything's tidy down here. The engineer looked around the bay, which was clearly a mess of cables and equipment, but not anything Robert would normally clean. Right. Well, we're going to be working late tonight trying to fix this thing. Probably best if you come back tomorrow. Robert nodded and headed for the exit. As he passed the engineer, he heard the young man mutter under his breath, like we don't have enough problems without the janitor wandering around. Back in his supply closet, Robert sat down and pulled out his lunch. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but he'd skipped breakfast and his stomach was growling. He unwrapped a sandwich his daughter had made for him and took a bite, thinking about everything he'd seen and heard today. His daughter Amy called him every night to check on him. She lived 2 hours away with her husband and their 2 kids, Robert's grandchildren. She was always trying to get him to retire, to move closer to them, to stop working so hard. But Robert couldn't afford to retire. Not yet. The medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment 4 years ago had wiped out most of their savings. He still had debt to pay off. The health insurance from SkyTech was the main reason he'd taken this job in the first place. If the company went under, Robert would lose that insurance. He'd lose the steady paycheck he relied on. At 62 years old, finding another job with good benefits wouldn't be easy. So yeah, he had personal reasons for caring about whether SkyTech survived. But it was more than that. He'd spent his whole life solving problems, fixing things that seemed unfixable. Walking away from a problem he knew how to solve went against everything in his nature. That evening, Robert stayed late even though his shift had ended. He went back down to the simulator bay after the engineers had left. The lights were dim and the building was quiet. He stood in front of the massive machine, looking at it like a puzzle he needed to solve. He didn't touch anything, didn't interfere. He just looked, letting his trained eyes take in every detail. The next morning, Robert arrived to find the building in even more chaos than before. Victoria had apparently been there all night again. People were running around looking exhausted and desperate. The demonstration was now less than 48 hours away and they still didn't have a solution. Robert was wiping down desks in an empty office when he saw Victoria walk past in the hallway. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was talking to David, her voice hoarse from stress or lack of sleep or both. "I've called everyone," she was saying. "Every qualified pilot within a 200-mile radius. Nobody's available on this short notice. The ones who are available want $50,000 just to show up. We can't afford that." "What about the simulator consultants?" David asked. "Maybe one of them could operate it for the demonstration." Victoria laughed, but it was a bitter sound without any humor. "They can't even figure out how to fix it, and you think they can demonstrate it? We're completely screwed, David. We might as well start preparing the bankruptcy paperwork now." They turned a corner and their voices faded. Robert stood still, holding his cleaning cloth, staring at nothing. The situation was worse than he'd thought. They were out of time, out of options, and out of hope. He went about his work mechanically for the rest of the day. He cleaned offices and emptied trash cans and restocked supply closets, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He kept thinking about that simulator sitting unused in the bay, about Lisa in accounting worried about her new nephew, about all the other employees who had families depending on them, mortgages to pay, lives that would be upended if SkyTech collapsed. When his shift ended at 6 o'clock, Robert didn't go. Robert didn't sleep much that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, thinking about what he was going to do in the morning. Part of him wondered if he was making a huge mistake. Victoria Chen had made her feelings about him perfectly clear. She'd laughed at him, dismissed him, told him to stay in his lane. Now he was about to walk back into her world and basically prove that she'd been wrong about everything. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from his daughter Amy. "Dad, are you okay? You sound stressed lately. Want to come for dinner this weekend?" Robert smiled and typed back a quick reply. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just some stuff at work. Dinner sounds good. Love you." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. Amy was the reason he kept going. After her mother died, they'd grown even closer. She worried about him working too hard, living alone in this small apartment, spending his days cleaning offices. She had no idea about his past in the Air Force. He'd never talked much about those years. When you spent decades flying experimental aircraft and training elite pilots, you learned that some accomplishments didn't need to be announced. You just did the work. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. Robert got up, showered, and put on his maintenance uniform. But today he also grabbed something from the back of his closet. A small folder containing documents he hadn't looked at in years. His military discharge papers. His flight certifications. His instructor credentials. He stuffed the folder into his backpack, feeling its weight like a secret he'd been carrying too long. The drive to SkyTech took 20 minutes through empty streets. Robert pulled into the parking lot just as the sun was starting to paint the horizon orange and pink. He sat in his truck for a moment, gathering his courage. Then he grabbed his backpack and headed inside. The building was mostly empty this early. Robert went straight to the Human Resources office on the second floor. He knew the HR director, Patricia, usually came in around 6 to catch up on paperwork before the chaos of the day started. Sure enough, her office light was on. Robert knocked on the doorframe. Patricia looked up from her computer, surprised to see him. She was a kind woman in her 50s with reading glasses that always sat crooked on her nose. "Robert, is everything okay? Do you need something?" "Hi, Patricia. Sorry to bother you so early. I need to talk to you about my employment file. It's important." Patricia gestured to the chair across from her desk. Robert sat down and pulled out his folder. For the next 20 minutes, he talked while Patricia listened, her eyes growing wider with every document he showed her. His Air Force records, his flight hours, his commendations, his certifications in aircraft systems, including advanced flight simulators. When he finished, Patricia sat back in her chair and just stared at him. "Robert, I don't understand. When you applied here 3 years ago, all of this was in your file. Your resume had everything. Why did you apply for a maintenance position? You're qualified to run our entire training department." Robert looked down at his hands. "After I retired from the Air Force, I did consulting work for a while. Good money, interesting projects. But then my wife got sick. Cancer. The treatment was expensive even with insurance. We burned through our savings fast. When she passed, I was left with a mountain of debt. I needed a job with steady pay and good health benefits, and I needed it fast. Your company had a maintenance opening. It was the only position available at the time. So I took it. But why didn't anyone notice? Why didn't anyone say something during the hiring process?" Robert shrugged. "I guess nobody looked too closely at the resume of someone applying to be a janitor. They saw I could pass a background check and that I showed up on time. That was enough." Patricia shook her head in disbelief. "Robert, we've had you mopping floors for 3 years when you could have been solving the exact problems that are threatening to destroy this company right now. I know. But I'm here now and I want to help. I know the company's in trouble with the Pacific Airlines contract. I know you need someone to demonstrate the simulator tomorrow, and I know I can fix whatever's wrong with it and run that demonstration." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she grabbed her phone. "Stay right here. Don't move. I need to make a call." She stepped out of her office, and Robert could hear her talking urgently to someone in the hallway. 10 minutes later, she came back in, followed by David, the CFO. David looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was loose and his shirt was wrinkled. "Robert, right? The maintenance guy?" David asked, though he barely looked at Robert. His attention was on the documents Patricia handed him. "Yes, sir." David started reading through Robert's military records, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. "This is real? You're telling me this is all legitimate?" "Yes, sir. You can verify everything with the Department of Defense if you need to." David let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "We've been drowning, absolutely drowning, trying to find someone qualified to help us, and you've been here the entire time?" He looked up at Patricia. "Does Victoria know about this?" "Not yet. I thought you should see it first." David started pacing, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane." He stopped and looked directly at Robert. "Can you really fix the simulator? Can you operate it for the demonstration tomorrow?" "Yes, sir. I believe I can do both. How sure are you? Because if we go to Victoria with this and it turns out you can't deliver, we're all going to look like idiots. More than we already do." Robert met his eyes steadily. "Sir, I spent 28 years in the Air Force as a pilot and instructor. I've worked with simulator technology since before half your engineers were born. I walked past your simulator bay weeks ago and identified the problem just by looking at it. The issue is a timing calibration between your control input system and hydraulic feedback. It's creating lag that makes experienced pilots feel like something's wrong. I can fix it in less than 4 hours, and I can demonstrate the system to whatever standards Pacific Airlines requires." The room went silent. David and Patricia exchanged looks. Finally, David said, "Come with me. Right now. Both of you." They took the elevator up to the executive floor. It was still early, barely 7 in the morning, but Victoria's office light was on. She'd probably been there all night again. David knocked on her door and walked in without waiting for an answer. Victoria was at her desk, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. She looked up irritably. "David, unless you're here to tell me you found a qualified pilot who can help us, I really don't have time for—" She stopped when she saw Robert standing behind David and Patricia. Her expression hardened immediately. "What is this? Why is maintenance here?" "Victoria, you need to see something," David said, his voice urgent. He placed Robert's documents on her desk. Victoria looked at them like they might bite her. "I'm very busy, David. I don't have time for whatever this is. Just look, please." With an exasperated sigh, Victoria picked up the first document. Robert watched her face as she read. Watched the confusion, then the shock, then something that might have been anger or embarrassment or both. She read through everything, taking her time, not saying a word. The silence in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, she set down the papers and looked up at Robert. Her expression was unreadable. "Lieutenant Colonel Robert Wheeler, retired Air Force test pilot, flight instructor, 10,000 plus flight hours," she paused. "You've been working as our janitor for 3 years. "Yes, ma'am. You applied for a maintenance position when you're qualified to run our entire training operation." "I needed the job, ma'am. And the health insurance." Victoria stood up and walked to her window, staring out at the city. Nobody spoke. Robert could feel David and Patricia's nervous energy beside him. After what felt like an hour but was probably only a minute, Victoria turned back around. "That day in the conference room," she said quietly. 2 weeks ago. When you suggested checking the timing calibration, you knew exactly what you were talking about." "Yes, ma'am. And I laughed at you. I told you that you were just maintenance. That you should stay in your lane." Robert didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say to that. Victoria walked back to her desk and sat down heavily. She looked tired in a way that went beyond just lack of sleep. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not just let the company fail? After the way I treated you, it would serve me right." "Because it's not just about you, ma'am," Robert said. "There are 300 people working in this building. People with families and mortgages and lives that depend on their jobs here. If SkyTech goes under, they all suffer. I've got the ability to help, so that's what I'm going to do, whether you want me to or not." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh like in the conference room. It was the laugh of someone who just realized how badly they'd misjudged a situation. "David," she said, not taking her eyes off Robert, "what time is the Pacific Airlines demonstration scheduled for tomorrow?" 2 o'clock in the afternoon. "And we have how long to fix the simulator and prepare?" "About 30 hours, Victoria nodded slowly. Then she stood up and walked around her desk to stand directly in front of Robert. "Mr. Wheeler, I was wrong about you. Completely, utterly wrong. And I apologize for that." The next 30 hours were like nothing SkyTech had ever experienced before. Robert walked around the simulator with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, pointing out problems that the consultants had completely missed. The engineers, skeptical at first, quickly realized they were dealing with someone who actually knew what he was talking about. "The hydraulic feedback system is fine," Robert explained to a group of technicians gathered around the control panel. "The problem is that your digital control inputs are processing on a different clock cycle than your physical systems. When a pilot moves the stick, there's a 20-millisecond delay before the simulator responds. That doesn't sound like much, but to someone with thousands of flight hours, it feels wrong. Their muscle memory is telling them something's off, even if they can't explain what." A young engineer named Kevin spoke up. "But we've checked the timing synchronization multiple times. Everything should be aligned." Robert smiled patiently. "You checked the primary systems, but you didn't account for the buffer delay in the translation layer. See this component here?" He pointed to a specific module in the control system. "This is adding latency that's not showing up in your diagnostic tests because you're measuring from the wrong reference point." Kevin's eyes widened. Oh my God. You're right. How did we miss that? Because you were looking for a hydraulic problem when it was actually a software timing issue. Easy mistake to make if you're not used to troubleshooting older integrated systems like this. The team got to work immediately, making the adjustments Robert specified. While they worked on the technical side, Robert started preparing for the demonstration itself. He needed to shake off 3 years of rust and remember what it felt like to be an instructor again. Victoria watched from the observation room above the bay. David stood beside her, both of them looking down at the activity below. I still can't believe this is happening, David said. 3 years. He's been here 3 years and nobody noticed. We didn't notice because we didn't look, Victoria said quietly. We saw a maintenance uniform and decided we knew everything we needed to know about who he was. She paused, watching Robert work with the engineers. That's on me. I built a culture where people were judged by their titles instead of their abilities. What are you going to do about it? Victoria turned to look at David. If we survive tomorrow, I'm going to make some changes around here. Big ones. Down in the bay, Robert was testing the simulator's control systems. He sat in the pilot's seat and ran through a series of standard maneuvers, feeling how the machine responded. The engineers had made the timing adjustments, but now everything needed to be calibrated and fine-tuned. This was the delicate work that separated adequate from excellent. Kevin, Robert called out, can you pull up the response curve data on your screen? Kevin brought up a graph showing how the simulator responded to control inputs. Robert studied it carefully. Good, that's much better. But see this spike here at the 60-degree mark? That's going to feel jerky to the pilot. Let's smooth out that transition. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. People brought in pizza and coffee. Engineers who'd planned to leave at 5 stayed until midnight. There was an energy in the building that hadn't been there in months. Everyone knew this was their last chance to save the company, and they were watching a master at work. Around 11 o'clock that night, Robert finally sat back in the pilot's seat and smiled. All right, let's run a full scenario. Kevin, load up the emergency procedure protocol. The simulator hummed to life around Robert. Screens lit up, showing a cockpit view from 30,000 feet. Robert's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, and for the first time in 3 years he felt completely at home. This was who he was. Not a janitor pushing a mop, not an invisible old man emptying trash cans. He was a pilot, an instructor, someone who understood machines and flight in his bones. He ran through the emergency scenario flawlessly, his movements smooth and confident. The engineers watched in awe as he handled situations that would have overwhelmed most pilots. When the scenario ended, the entire bay erupted in applause. Robert climbed out of the simulator, stretching his back. He wasn't 25 anymore, and sitting in that seat reminded him of every one of his 62 years. But it felt good, really good. Victoria came down from the observation room. That was incredible, she said. You make it look easy. It's not easy, Robert replied. It's just practice. 10,000 hours of it, she smiled. The Pacific Airlines team arrives tomorrow at 2. Do you need anything else to prepare? Robert thought for a moment. Actually, yes. I need you to do something for me. Name it. I want you to introduce me tomorrow as Robert Wheeler, senior flight instructor. Not Lieutenant Colonel, not retired Air Force, just Robert Wheeler. These clients don't care about my military background. They care about whether their pilots will get good training. Let my work speak for itself. Victoria studied his face. You don't want credit for your service? I spent 28 years getting credit for my service. Now I just want to do a good job and help people. That's all, she nodded slowly. All right. Robert Wheeler it is. The team worked until 3 in the morning, making final adjustments and running test scenarios. When Robert finally sent everyone home to get a few hours of sleep, the simulator was performing better than it ever had. He stayed behind for a while, sitting in the quiet bay, just looking at the machine they'd brought back to life. His phone buzzed. A text from Amy. Dad, I drove past your apartment and your truck wasn't there. It's 3 a.m. Are you okay? Robert smiled and called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice worried. Dad, what's going on? I'm at work, sweetheart. We've got a big demonstration tomorrow and I'm helping out with some technical issues. Technical issues? I thought you cleaned offices. Robert hesitated. He'd never told Amy about his past because he didn't want her to see him as some washed-up former military guy, trying to relive his glory days. He'd wanted her to see him as her dad, working an honest job and doing his best. But now, sitting in the simulator bay, he realized he'd been hiding from more than just his coworkers. "Amy, there's some stuff about my work history I never told you about. After tomorrow, I'd like to sit down and talk. Tell you some stories about your old man's past." There was a pause on the other end. "Dad, you're scaring me. Are you in some kind of trouble?" No, nothing like that. Actually, things might be looking up. I'll explain everything this weekend at dinner, okay? I promise. Okay, but you need to get some sleep. Please? I will. Love you, sweetheart. Love you too, Dad. Robert hung up and headed home for a few hours of rest. When his alarm went off at 7 the next morning, he felt more energized than he had in years. Today was the day. Today he got to prove that experience and skill mattered more than assumptions and prejudices. He arrived at SkyTech to find the building buzzing with nervous energy. The Pacific Airlines team was due at 2 o'clock. That gave them 7 hours to do final preparations and run through practice demonstrations. Robert gathered the engineering team for a brief meeting. "Listen up, everyone. Today's gonna go one of two ways. Either we impress these clients and save this company, or we fail and start looking for new jobs. I've been in high-pressure situations before, and here's what I've learned. Trust your training, stay calm, and don't try to be perfect. Just be competent and confident. That's all anyone's looking for." The team nodded, looking slightly less terrified. Robert spent the morning running through scenarios and making final adjustments. Victoria stopped by around noon, looking more put together than she had in days. She'd clearly gotten some sleep and changed clothes. "How are you feeling?" she asked Robert. "Ready, how about you?" "Terrified. This contract represents 40% of our projected revenue for next year. If we lose it, we'll have to lay off at least 100 people by the end of the quarter." Robert looked at her seriously. "Victoria, can I ask you something? Why did you take this job? You've got a finance background. You could work anywhere. Why an aviation company?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she walked over to the simulator and placed her hand on its side. "My father was a commercial pilot. He died in a crash when I was 16. The investigation showed that inadequate training and poor equipment maintenance were contributing factors." She took a deep breath. "I spent my career in finance because I was good at it. But when I got the chance to lead SkyTech, I saw it as an opportunity to make aviation safer, to prevent other families from going through what mine did." "That's a good reason," Robert said quietly. "Except I got so focused on the financial side, on saving money and cutting costs, that I forgot about the human element. I forgot that aviation safety starts with respecting the people who actually do the work. People like you." Before Robert could respond, David rushed into the bay. "They're here." Pacific Airlines just pulled into the parking lot, 20 minutes early. Victoria straightened her jacket and took a deep breath. "All right, let's do this." The Pacific Airlines team consisted of 5 people, their VP of training, 2 senior pilots, and 2 technical specialists. They walked into the simulator bay looking skeptical and unimpressed. Robert had seen that look before. These were people who'd been disappointed. Robert spent the next 3 days working his regular maintenance shifts while thinking about Victoria's job offer. He pushed his cleaning cart through the same hallways, emptied the same trash cans, and wiped down the same desks. But something had shifted. People noticed him now. They said good morning. They asked him questions about the simulator demonstration. The invisible janitor had suddenly become visible, and Robert wasn't sure how he felt about it. On Thursday morning, Victoria called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. The entire company gathered, wondering what the announcement would be. There were rumors flying around about promotions, about changes, about the Pacific Airlines contract being even bigger than anyone had thought. Robert stood in the back of the auditorium in his maintenance uniform, trying to stay out of sight like he'd done for 3 years. But Victoria spotted him and gestured for him to come to the front. Reluctantly, Robert made his way through the crowd of employees who parted to let him pass. Victoria stood at the podium looking out at her company. "I want to talk to you all about something important," she began. 3 days ago, we were about to lose the biggest contract in our company's history. We were facing layoffs and possibly bankruptcy. Today, not only is that contract secured, but it's been expanded. Pacific Airlines is doubling their order and recommending us to other carriers. The auditorium erupted in applause. Victoria waited for it to die down before continuing. "We were saved by someone I'd like you to meet properly." Robert Wheeler, can you come up here, please? Robert walked to the podium, uncomfortable with all the attention. Victoria turned to face him and the crowd. Many of you know Robert as part of our maintenance staff. What you don't know is that Robert is a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel with 28 years of service. He's a test pilot, a flight instructor, and has more experience with aviation systems than probably everyone in this room combined. And for 3 years I had him cleaning toilets because I never bothered to look beyond his job title. The room was completely silent now. Robert could feel everyone's eyes on him. Victoria continued, her voice thick with emotion. I stood in a conference room 2 weeks ago and laughed at Robert when he tried to offer technical advice. I told him he was just maintenance and that he should stay in his lane. I was cruel and dismissive and completely wrong. Not just wrong about Robert, but wrong about how I was running this company. She turned to address the entire auditorium. We've built a culture here where people are judged by their titles instead of their abilities, where experience and knowledge are overlooked if they come from the wrong position on the org chart. That ends today. Starting immediately, I'm implementing an open door policy where any employee, regardless of their role, can submit ideas directly to senior leadership. We're also conducting a complete review of all employee backgrounds to make sure we're not wasting talent like we did with Robert. Victoria looked back at Robert. In front of all of you, I want to apologize to Robert Wheeler for how I treated him, and I want to offer him the position of Director of Flight Training if he'll accept it. The room burst into applause again. Robert stood there, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. He looked out at the crowd and saw Lisa from accounting, the young woman who'd been worried about layoffs. She was crying and smiling at the same time. He saw Kevin and the other engineers who'd worked with him on the simulator. He saw junior employees and senior managers, all of them watching him, waiting to hear what he would say. Robert stepped up to the microphone. Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate the offer and the apology. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I want to tell you all something. When I took the maintenance job here 3 years ago, it was because I needed it. I needed the paycheck and the health insurance. My wife had just passed away from cancer, and I was drowning in medical debt. I was overqualified for the position, but pride doesn't pay bills. So I put on this uniform and I did the work, and I did it well because that's how I was raised. He looked around the room. For 3 years I was invisible to most of you. You walked past me every single day without seeing me, and that wasn't your fault, not really. We're all conditioned to judge people based on what they do, what they wear, what position they hold. But here's what I learned from being invisible. Every single person in this building matters. The person who cleans your office works just as hard as the person in the corner office. The person who answers phones is just as valuable as the person who signs contracts. We all contribute to making this company work. Robert's voice grew stronger. Victoria asked me to be Director of Flight Training. It's a generous offer, but before I accept it, I have some conditions. First, I want every member of our support staff, from maintenance to food service to security, to receive a comprehensive review of their backgrounds and skills. If we've got talented people in the wrong positions, I want them moved to where they can do the most good. Second, I want our training program to include respect training for everyone, from entry-level employees to executives. We need to build a culture where people are valued for who they are and what they can contribute, not what their job title says. He paused. And third, I want to keep my maintenance uniform. I'm going to wear it 1 day a week, and I'm going to clean offices and empty trash cans just like I've been doing. Because I never want to forget what it feels like to be invisible, and I never want anyone else in this company to feel that way either. The auditorium was completely silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. It was Lisa from accounting. Others joined in, and soon the entire room was on their feet applauding. Robert saw tears on faces throughout the crowd. Victoria was crying too, nodding her agreement to his conditions. When the meeting ended, Robert was swarmed by employees wanting to thank him or shake his hand or share their own stories of feeling overlooked. It took him an hour to make it out of the auditorium. He found a quiet corner in the hallway and just breathed for a minute, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Dad? A voice made him turn. Amy was standing there, her eyes wide with shock. What are you doing here, sweetheart? Victoria's assistant called me. She told me I should come watch the company meeting. Dad, what is going on? Why didn't you tell me about any of this? The Air Force? The test pilot stuff? All these years? Robert sighed and led her to a bench where they could sit down. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see me as some washed-up former military guy trying to live in the past. After your mom died and I took this job, I just wanted to be your dad. Not Lieutenant Colonel Wheeler. Just Robert, your dad, working an honest job. Amy's eyes filled with tears. Dad, I could never think of you as washed up. You're the strongest person I know. You raised me by yourself after Mom got sick. You worked 2 jobs to pay for my college. You've always been my hero, with or without the fancy titles. Robert pulled her into a hug, feeling his own eyes water. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. I should have. You're telling me now. That's what matters. Amy pulled back and looked at him seriously. So are you taking the job? Director of flight training? I think so. It's time to stop hiding, I guess. Good. Because I want my kids to know their grandpa is a pilot and a teacher, not just the guy who fixes things, although you're pretty good at fixing things too. Robert laughed. Speaking of the grandkids, how about that dinner this weekend? I've got 3 years' worth of stories to tell. Over the next few weeks, SkyTech transformed in ways nobody had expected. The employee review that Robert had requested uncovered a dozen people working in positions below their qualifications. There was a software engineer working in data entry because he'd needed any job during a recession. A former nurse working reception because she'd moved to the area for her husband's job. A retired teacher handling mail distribution because she wanted something to do after retirement. But her experience had been dismissed. Victoria personally met with each of them, apologized for the company's oversight, and offered them positions that matched their skills. Not everyone took the new roles. Some people, like the retired teacher, were happy where they were and just wanted recognition that they had more to offer if needed. But many did transfer to new positions, and the company became stronger for it. Robert built the flight training program from the ground up. He hired instructors not based on where they'd gone to school, but on their actual experience and teaching ability. He implemented safety protocols that became models for the entire industry, and true to his word, every Wednesday he wore his maintenance uniform and spent the day cleaning offices alongside the regular maintenance staff. The first time he did it, the maintenance crew thought he was mocking them. But Robert showed up with his cart and worked just as hard as everyone else. He learned their names, heard their stories, and treated them as colleagues. Word spread through the company that the new director of flight training was serious about respect going both ways. 3 months after the Pacific Airlines demonstration, Robert was in his office reviewing training materials when Victoria knocked on his door. Got a minute? She asked. Sure, come in. Victoria sat down and placed a folder on his desk. Pacific Airlines isn't the only company that's noticed our improved training program. I've